Blake Hudson checked his boarding pass for the third time. Seat 27B. Middle seat. Of course it was. He dragged his worn backpack down the narrow aisle of Flight 847, avoiding eye contact with every passenger already settled in their seats. The plane smelled like recycled air and coffee. Blake hated flying. Not because of fear, but because of the memories. 3 years ago, he'd made the biggest mistake of his life on a flight just like this one. A mistake that cost someone everything. He squeezed past an elderly woman reading a magazine and dropped into his seat. The man by the window didn't look up from his phone. The aisle seat remained empty. Blake buckled his seatbelt and closed his eyes. Los Angeles to New York. 6 hours trapped at 30,000 feet with his thoughts. 6 hours to think about the court hearing waiting for him tomorrow. 6 hours to wonder if forgiveness was even possible. The flight attendant's voice crackled through the speakers, welcoming everyone aboard. Blake pulled his hood up and sank deeper into his seat. He just wanted this flight to be over. He had no idea that in the next few hours, everything would change. A woman rushed down the aisle, juggling a purse, a coffee cup, and a small laptop bag. She looked flustered, her dark hair falling loose from its clip. She stopped at row 27 and glanced at her ticket. 27A? She asked Blake. He nodded and stood to let her pass. She thanked him breathlessly and settled into the aisle seat. Her name tag read Hannah Price, conference speaker. Sorry, she said, still catching her breath. Traffic was horrible. I thought I'd miss it. Blake offered a small nod but said nothing. He wasn't here to make friends. Hannah didn't seem to notice his silence. She organized her bags, pulled out her phone, and sent several quick texts. Blake caught glimpses of her screen. Messages to someone named Alex. Made it. Talk soon. Love you. The window seat passenger finally looked up. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and tired eyes. He wore an expensive suit and a watch that probably cost more than Blake's car. Please like and subscribe to help our channel. Stanley Hoffman, the man said, extending his hand to Hannah. She shook it warmly. Hannah Price. Both looked at Blake. He hesitated, then shook their hands. Blake. No last name. That was safer. The plane pushed back from the gate. Blake watched through the window as Los Angeles grew smaller. Somewhere down there, his mother was probably praying for him. She'd always believed in second chances, even when Blake had stopped believing in himself. The captain's voice came through the speakers. Good afternoon, folks. This is Captain Rodriguez. We're looking at smooth skies today and should have you in New York right on schedule. Blake didn't believe in smooth skies anymore. He'd learned that turbulence came when you least expected it. The engines roared to life. The plane accelerated down the runway. Blake gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. Hannah noticed and gave him a kind smile. Nervous flyer? She asked. Something like that, Blake muttered. The plane lifted off. Blake's stomach dropped. He forced himself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The technique his therapist taught him. The therapist he could no longer afford. Stanley opened a newspaper. Hannah pulled out her laptop. Blake stared at the seat in front of him, trying to quiet the voices in his head. The voices that reminded him he didn't deserve forgiveness. That some mistakes were too big to fix. 30 minutes into the flight, Hannah closed her laptop and turned to Blake. So what takes you to New York? She asked. Blake tensed. Just business. Me too. I'm speaking at a medical conference. She smiled. I'm a pediatric surgeon. I specialize in heart surgery for children. Blake felt something twist in his chest. Of course she saved children's lives. Of course she was the kind of person who made the world better. Stanley lowered his newspaper. That's noble work. What about you? Hannah asked him. Real estate. 40 years of buying and selling buildings. He folded the paper. I'm heading to New York to finalize my retirement. This is actually my last business trip. Hannah clapped softly. Congratulations. They both looked at Blake expectantly. He shifted uncomfortably. I'm meeting with a lawyer, he said quietly. The mood shifted. Hannah's smile faded slightly. Stanley raised an eyebrow. But neither pushed for details. Blake was grateful. A flight attendant came by with drinks. Hannah ordered tea. Stanley asked for scotch. Blake requested water. On the wagon? Stanley asked, not unkindly. Blake nodded. 2 years sober. Good for you, son, Stanley said, raising his glass. That takes strength. Blake didn't feel strong. He felt like a coward running toward judgment. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers started moving around the cabin. Blake watched a young mother walk past, carrying a baby. His throat tightened. He looked away quickly. Hannah was reading something on her tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. Blake noticed her hands shaking slightly. You okay? He asked before he could stop himself. She looked up, surprised. Just nervous about tomorrow's presentation. It's the biggest talk I've ever given. What's it about? Hannah's face softened. A new surgical technique. If it works, it could save hundreds of children who wouldn't survive traditional surgery. I've spent 5 years developing it. That's incredible, Blake said, and meant it. It's also terrifying, she admitted. What if I mess up the presentation? What if they don't believe in it? Stanley leaned over. Then you'll try again. Important work is never easy. Hannah smiled. Thanks. Both of you. Blake felt odd being included. He wasn't used to kindness from strangers anymore. After the accident, after the trial, after the media storm, people had looked at him with disgust and anger. Never warmth. The plane hit a small bump. Nothing serious, but Blake gripped the armrest anyway. Hannah noticed. Really not a fan of flying. Bad memories, Blake said. 2 hours into the flight, lunch service began. The smell of reheated chicken filled the cabin. Blake picked at his meal, not really hungry. His mind kept drifting to tomorrow. To the courtroom. To the family that would be there, still grieving. So what kind of law are you dealing with? Stanley asked, breaking the silence. If you don't mind me asking. Blake set down his fork. The kind where you try to make things right after you've done something terribly wrong. Hannah and Stanley exchanged glances. Blake could see the questions in their eyes, but they didn't press. I was drunk, Blake said suddenly. He hadn't planned to tell them. The words just came out. 3 years ago. I got behind the wheel. There was an accident. The air between them grew heavy. Someone died, Blake continued, his voice barely above a whisper. A college student. 21 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. Hannah's hand moved to her mouth. Stanley's expression remained neutral, but his eyes showed understanding. I served 18 months. Got out 6 months ago. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with her family's lawyer. They're filing a civil suit. Blake's hands trembled. They have every right to. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Hannah was the first to break the silence. I'm sorry, she said softly. For all of it. For her family, for you. Blake looked up, confused. For me. Living with that guilt must be crushing, Hannah said. I see patients every day who carry burdens. I know what guilt can do to a person. Stanley nodded slowly. My brother was killed by a drunk driver. 30 years ago. Blake felt his heart stop. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. No, Stanley raised his hand. Let me finish. The driver was 17. A kid who made a horrible mistake. I hated him for years. That hate ate me alive. It destroyed my marriage, my relationship with my own kids. He paused, taking a sip of his drink. Then one day, I realized the hate was killing me, not him. So I forgave him. Not because he deserved it. Because I needed to. Blake felt tears burning in his eyes. The family I hurt, they'll never forgive me. Maybe not, Hannah said gently. But have you forgiven yourself? Blake shook his head. How can I? That's the hardest part, Stanley said. Forgiving yourself. The conversation drifted to quieter topics, But Blake felt something shift inside him. Maybe absolution wasn't about what others gave you. Maybe it started from within. 3 hours into the flight, Blake noticed Stanley wasn't looking well. The older man had grown quiet, his face pale. He pressed his hand against his chest occasionally, like he was checking his heartbeat. "You all right?" Blake asked. "Fine," Stanley said quickly. "Just indigestion. The airline food, you know." But Blake had seen that expression before. His grandfather had looked the same way 2 days before his heart attack. Blake's stomach knotted with worry. Hannah was asleep, her head resting against the window. The cabin lights had dimmed. Most passengers were dozing or watching movies on their screens. The plane hummed steadily through the afternoon sky. Stanley shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. He unbuttoned his collar and loosened his tie. "Are you sure you're okay?" Blake pressed. "You don't look good." "I'm fine," Stanley insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's just hard to breathe. Probably the recycled air." Blake's concern grew. He'd taken a first aid course as part of his probation requirements. He recognized the symptoms. Chest discomfort. Shortness of breath. Pale, clammy skin. "Stanley," Blake said carefully, "I think you might be having a heart attack." Stanley waved him off. "Don't be dramatic. I'm just tired." But then Stanley's hand went to his chest again, and this time his face contorted in pain. His breathing became rapid and shallow. Stanley gasped and doubled over. His newspaper fell to the floor. Several passengers nearby looked up, startled. Blake unbuckled and grabbed Stanley's shoulders. "Hannah! Wake up!" Hannah jolted awake. "What's happening?" "I think he's having a heart attack." Hannah's training kicked in immediately. She assessed Stanley with practiced efficiency, checking his pulse, looking at his color, asking him rapid-fire questions. "How long has your chest hurt? Any pain in your left arm? Are you on any medications?" Stanley could barely speak. He nodded, trying to answer, but the pain was too intense. "Call the flight attendant." Hannah ordered Blake. "Now." Blake pressed the call button repeatedly. A flight attendant rushed over, saw the situation, and sprinted toward the front of the plane. Within seconds, an announcement came over the speakers. "If there's a doctor on board, please identify yourself immediately." Hannah was already moving Stanley into a better position. "I'm a surgeon," she told the gathering flight attendants. "Get me the medical kit. And I need everyone to give us space." Passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. Some pulled out phones to record. Blake wanted to scream at them to show some decency, but he focused on helping Hannah instead. "Please like and subscribe to help our channel." The flight attendant returned with the medical kit. Hannah tore it open, her hand steady despite the chaos. She pulled out aspirin and gave it to Stanley. "Chew this," she instructed. "It'll help thin your blood." She turned to the flight attendant. "Do we have a defibrillator?" "Yes, right here." "Get it ready. And I need to know if there are any other medical professionals on board." The flight attendant spoke into her radio. A moment later, she shook her head. "You're the only doctor." Hannah's face showed a flicker of fear. Blake understood why. She was a pediatric heart surgeon. Stanley was a 60-year-old man with a completely different physiology. This wasn't her specialty. But she didn't hesitate. "Stanley, listen to me," Hannah said firmly. "You're having a heart attack. I'm going to do everything I can to stabilize you. Do you understand?" Stanley nodded weakly, his eyes filled with terror. The captain's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency on board. We're making an emergency landing in Denver. Please remain calm and seated." The plane began to descend. Blake felt his ears pop. Around them, passengers whispered nervously. Hannah worked quickly, monitoring Stanley's vital signs, trying to keep him calm. Blake knelt beside her, feeling helpless but wanting to help somehow. Stanley's condition worsened rapidly. His breathing became labored. His lips started turning blue. Hannah's calm expression cracked. His oxygen levels are dropping, she said to the flight attendant. I need oxygen, now. The attendant rushed away and returned with an oxygen mask. Hannah fitted it over Stanley's face, but his color didn't improve. Then Stanley's eyes rolled back. His body went rigid. His coding. Hannah shouted. Get back, everyone. She started chest compressions, counting under her breath. Blake watched in horror as Hannah fought to save Stanley's life. Her compressions were perfect, textbook technique, but Stanley wasn't responding. Come on, Hannah muttered. Come on, Stanley. Stay with me. 30 compressions. 2 rescue breaths. Repeat. Hannah's arms had to be burning, but she didn't stop. Blake felt completely useless. He'd caused death once through his negligence. Now he was watching someone die despite everyone's best efforts. The defibrillator charged with a high-pitched whine. Clue. Hannah placed the paddles on Stanley's chest. His body jerked. Nothing. Still no pulse. Hannah resumed compressions. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Blake could see desperation in her eyes. She was losing him. Please, she whispered. Please don't die. Blake closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done since before the accident. He prayed. As Hannah worked, Blake's mind raced. There had to be something he could do. He wasn't a doctor, but he wasn't completely ignorant either. Then a memory surfaced. Sharp and unexpected. During his time in prison, Blake had been assigned to the medical ward. He'd worked alongside the prison doctor for 8 months. Dr. Williams had been kind to Blake, teaching him things beyond basic first aid. Once, Blake had witnessed a prisoner having a heart attack. Dr. Williams had done something unusual, something he'd learned in rural medicine. Hannah, Blake said urgently. Wait. She looked up, confused, her compressions not stopping. There's something else we can try, Blake said. I saw it done once. It's unconventional, but... I'm listening, Hannah gasped, still working. Blake explained what he'd seen. A specific combination of pressure points and positioning that Dr. Williams had used. Something about stimulating the vagus nerve to help restart the heart's rhythm. It wasn't standard protocol. Most modern doctors wouldn't even know about it. Hannah stared at him. That's ancient medicine. There's no scientific. Do you have a better option? Blake challenged. Stanley's lips were purple now. Time was running out. Hannah made a decision. Tell me exactly what to do. Blake guided her through the technique, remembering every detail Dr. Williams had shown him. It seemed crazy. It probably wouldn't work. But doing nothing wasn't an option. Hannah followed Blake's instructions precisely. She positioned Stanley's head at a specific angle. Applied pressure to certain points on his neck and chest. Combined it with the compressions in a particular rhythm. The cabin was silent except for Hannah's counting and the drone of engines. Passengers held their breath. The flight attendants watched with wide eyes. Nothing happened. Then Stanley's body jerked. Not from the defibrillator. A spontaneous movement. Hannah checked for a pulse. Her eyes went wide. I've got something, she whispered. Faint, but it's there. She adjusted his position, continued the technique Blake had described. Stanley's chest rose and fell on its own. Shallow breaths, but breaths. Oh my God, Hannah breathed. It's working. Color started returning to Stanley's face. His eyelids fluttered. Within minutes, his vital signs stabilized. Not perfect, but alive. Definitely alive. The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers cheered. The flight attendants looked like they might cry. Hannah sat back on her heels, trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Blake just stared at Stanley, unable to believe what had just happened. Stanley's eyes opened slowly. He looked confused, disoriented, but conscious. He tried to speak, but Hannah put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Don't talk. Save your strength. You had a heart attack, but you're going to be okay now. The plane touched down in Denver 20 minutes later. Emergency vehicles surrounded them immediately, lights flashing. Paramedics boarded and took over Stanley's care with professional efficiency. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, Stanley grabbed Blake's hand. "You saved my life," he rasped. Blake shook his head. "Hannah did that. She's the doctor." "No," Stanley insisted, his grip surprisingly strong. "Both of you. Together." The paramedics wheeled him away. Hannah gathered her things, preparing to accompany Stanley to the hospital. She turned to Blake. "What you did? I've never seen anything like that. Where did you learn it?" "Prison," Blake said simply. "The medical ward." Hannah studied him for a long moment. "The drunk driving charge." He nodded. "Then something good came from that terrible time," she said softly. "You learned something that saved a man's life today." Blake felt something crack inside his chest. For 3 years, he'd believed his life was nothing but a collection of mistakes and regrets. He'd thought the accident had destroyed any possibility of redemption. But maybe, just maybe, even the darkest experiences could produce moments of light. "Go with him," Blake told Hannah. "Make sure he's okay." She squeezed his shoulder. "Thank you, Blake. For everything." As she left, Blake sank into a seat. His hands were shaking. Around him, passengers talked excitedly about what they'd witnessed. The flight crew announced they would wait while paramedics cleared the plane. Passengers could deplane for the delay or remain on board. Most stayed, too shaken to move. Blake sat alone, processing what had happened. A flight attendant approached him, a young woman with kind eyes. "That was incredible," she said. "You helped save his life." "I just remembered something I'd seen," Blake mumbled. "Don't downplay it. You kept your head in a crisis. You thought outside the box. That man is alive because you spoke up." She smiled. "What's your name?" "Blake Hudson." She pulled out her phone. "I'm going to make sure the airline knows what you did. You deserve recognition." "No," Blake said quickly. "Please don't. I don't need recognition. I'm glad he's alive." The attendant looked puzzled but nodded. "Okay. But for what it's worth, you're a hero today." Hero. The word felt foreign. Blake Hudson, the convicted killer, a hero. It didn't fit his self-image at all. Other passengers approached him throughout the delay. An elderly woman thanked him. A businessman shook his hand. A teenager asked for a selfie, which Blake declined. One man, about Blake's age, sat down beside him. "I overheard you talking earlier," the man said quietly. "About the drunk driving accident." Blake tensed. "Yeah. My sister was killed by a drunk driver," the man said. 5 years ago." Blake felt sick. "I'm sorry. I understand if you—" "No, let me finish," the man interrupted gently. "I was so angry for so long. I wanted every drunk driver in the world to suffer. I wanted them to feel the pain our family felt." Blake waited, bracing himself. "But watching you today, I saw someone who made a terrible mistake trying to make amends the only way he could. By helping. By being present when someone needed you." The man's eyes were wet. "My sister would have liked that. She always believed in second chances." "I don't deserve a second chance," Blake whispered. "Maybe not. Maybe none of us do. But we get them anyway." The man stood. "What you did today mattered. Don't forget that." He walked away, leaving Blake alone with his thoughts. An hour later, the plane was cleared to continue to New York. Hannah returned, looking exhausted but relieved. "Stanley's stable," she reported, sliding into her seat. "They're keeping him for observation, but the doctors think he'll make a full recovery." "That's great," Blake said. Hannah turned to him. "They asked what technique I used. I told them the truth, that you provided the instructions. They'd never heard of it. They want to research it." The plane lifted off from Denver. The cabin felt different now. The passengers had bonded through the shared crisis. Strangers smiled at each other. People checked on their neighbors. Blake stared out the window at the mountains below. Somewhere down there, Stanley was in a hospital bed, alive because of what had happened at 30,000 feet. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah said. Blake nodded. "Do you believe in fate?" I used to, Blake said. Before the accident, I thought everything happened for a reason. After, I stopped believing in anything. What about now? Blake considered the question. I don't know. Part of me wants to think that being on this flight, being in the right place to help Stanley, means something. But another part thinks it's just random chance. Hannah smiled. Maybe it's both. Maybe we make choices, and those choices put us in position for meaningful moments. You chose to get sober. You chose to work in the prison medical ward. You chose to speak up today. I also chose to drink and drive, Blake said bitterly. Yes. And that choice had devastating consequences. But it doesn't erase the choice you made today. Both things are true. You caused terrible harm, and you also saved a life. Blake felt tears on his face. He didn't try to hide them. How do I live with both? He asked. Hannah thought for a moment before answering. My first year as a surgeon, I lost a patient during a routine procedure. A 7-year-old boy. I made a mistake, a small one, but it was enough. He died on my table. Blake looked at her, seeing the pain in her eyes. For months, I couldn't operate. I'd freeze up in the OR. I wanted to quit medicine entirely. How could I call myself a healer when I'd killed a child? What changed? Blake asked. His mother came to see me. She was grieving, angry, destroyed. But she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Don't let my son's death make you stop saving other children. Honor him by being better, not by giving up." Hannah's voice cracked. So I kept going. I developed new techniques. I studied harder. I saved hundreds of kids over the next decade. Including the surgical method I'm presenting tomorrow. It came from studying what went wrong that day. You turned tragedy into purpose, Blake said. I tried. Some days I succeed. Some days the guilt still crushes me. But I keep trying. She looked at him directly. You can do the same. What happened can't be undone. But what you do next, that's entirely up to you. The words hit Blake like a physical force. What you do next. Not what you did. What you do next. Blake's phone buzzed as they descended toward New York. Service had returned. Messages flooded in. His mother. Praying for you tomorrow. I love you. His lawyer. See you at 9 a.m. Don't be late. His probation officer. Remember our talk. Stay focused. Then one more message, from a number he didn't recognize. This is Alex, Hannah's husband. She just called me about what happened. Thank you for helping save that man. You're in our prayers. Blake stared at the message. Strangers were praying for him. When was the last time that happened? Before the accident. Probably. Before he became the villain in someone else's tragedy. Hannah was on her phone too, typing rapidly. She glanced at Blake. I'm telling my team about the technique. They want to look into it, see if there's scientific backing we've missed. It's probably just folklore, Blake said. Maybe. But folklore often contains kernels of truth. Ancient healers knew things we've forgotten. She smiled. Either way, it worked when we needed it to. The plane began its final descent into JFK. New York's skyline appeared in the distance, glittering in the early evening light. Blake's stomach churned. Tomorrow morning, he'd face the family he'd destroyed. He'd listen to their lawyer detail his negligence, his recklessness, his crime. He'd sign whatever papers they wanted. Pay whatever amount the court decided. But something was different now. The wheels touched down in New York. Passengers applauded, something Blake had never understood before, but now it felt appropriate. They'd all survived something together. Not just Stanley's heart attack, but the reminder of how fragile life really was. As the plane taxied to the gate, the captain made an announcement. Folks, I want to personally thank Dr. Hannah Price and passenger Blake Hudson for their quick thinking and courage today. Because of them, a man is alive who might not have been. That's what humanity looks like. The cabin erupted in applause again. Blake felt his face burn. He wasn't used to praise. He didn't know how to receive it. Hannah leaned over. Let them thank you. You earned it. I was just. You were brave, she interrupted. Own it. The plane docked. Passengers began gathering their belongings. Blake pulled down his backpack, feeling the weight of tomorrow pressing on him. But somehow, it felt lighter than before. In the jetway, a paramedic team waited. Standard procedure after a medical emergency. They asked Hannah questions about Stanley's treatment. She answered professionally, mentioning Blake's contribution several times. One of the paramedics turned to Blake. Where'd you learn that technique? Prison medical ward, Blake said, no longer ashamed to admit it. The paramedic nodded, impressed rather than judgmental. Smart thinking. We could use people like you in emergency services. In the terminal, Hannah and Blake walked together toward baggage claim. Neither seemed ready to part ways yet. What time is your meeting tomorrow? Hannah asked. 9 a.m. Manhattan Courthouse. My presentation is at 2. Want to meet for coffee after? I'd love to know how it goes. Blake hesitated. Making plans felt presumptuous, like assuming he'd have a future worth planning for. But Hannah waited patiently, her expression open and kind. Sure, he finally said. I'd like that. They exchanged phone numbers. At baggage claim, they found their luggage and stood awkwardly. Two strangers who'd been through something extraordinary together. Blake, Hannah said seriously, whatever happens tomorrow, remember what happened today. You have value. You have something to offer the world. Don't forget that. Thank you, Blake managed. For everything. For saving Stanley. For talking to me. For not judging me. We all need grace, Hannah said. Every single one of us. They hugged briefly, then went their separate ways. Blake caught a cab to his cheap hotel near the courthouse. The driver tried to make small talk, but Blake was lost in thought. His phone buzzed. A news alert. Passenger saves man's life with ancient medical technique on Flight 847. The story was already going viral. Blake's heart raced. The last time he'd been in the news, it was as the villain. Now people were calling him a hero. Blake's hotel room was small and sterile. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. The news story about Flight 847 had exploded. Videos from passengers showed Hannah and Blake working to save Stanley. Comments poured in. This restored my faith in humanity. Heroes walk among us. Everyone deserves a second chance. That last one made Blake pause. If these strangers knew his full story, would they still say that? Or would they turn on him like everyone else had? His phone rang. His mother. Blake, baby, I saw the news. You saved someone's life. Mom, it wasn't. Don't you dare minimize it. God put you on that plane for a reason. Blake wanted to argue, but he didn't have the energy. How are you, Mom? Worried about you. About tomorrow. Have you thought about what you're going to say? I'm going to apologize. Again. Tell them I know nothing I do will ever make up for what I took from them. And then what? I don't know. Pay whatever they ask. Try to move forward somehow. His mother was quiet for a moment. You sound different. More peaceful. Blake thought about Hannah's words. About Stanley's grip on his hand. About the man whose sister had been killed, offering understanding instead of anger. Maybe I am, Blake said. A little. After hanging up, Blake couldn't sleep. He paced the small room, replaying everything. The accident 3 years ago. The trial. Prison. His release. And now today, the impossible convergence of past and present at 30,000 feet. Blake stood outside the Manhattan courthouse at 8:30 a.m. He'd arrived early, unable to stay in the hotel room any longer. His suit felt tight. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. People streamed past him, lawyers and defendants and families seeking justice. Blake wondered how many of them carried guilt like his. How many of them had taken something irreplaceable from someone else. His lawyer, Mr. Peterson, arrived at 8:45. You ready? Peterson asked. No, Blake admitted. But I'm here. They entered the building together. Security. Metal detectors. Elevators. Hallways that smelled like old coffee and anxiety. Finally, they reached the right courtroom. Through the small window in the door, Blake saw them. The family. The victim's parents, both in their 50s, holding hands. Her younger brother, now probably 18. And an older woman, maybe a grandmother, with tissues clutched in her hand. Blake's knees nearly gave out. This was why he was here. Not for himself. For them. To face what he'd done. To let them see his remorse. To give them whatever closure they needed. Blake, Peterson said gently, there's something you should know. The family asked to speak with you before we go in. Privately. Blake's heart hammered. What? Why? They saw the news. About the flight. They want to talk. Blake couldn't breathe. This was it. The moment he'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. Peterson led Blake to a small conference room. The family sat on one side of a long table. Blake and Peterson sat on the other. The silence was suffocating. The mother spoke first. Her name was Mrs. Cooper. Blake remembered from the trial. We watched the video, she said, her voice tight with emotion. Of you on that airplane. Blake nodded, unable to speak. Our daughter, Amanda, she wanted to be a doctor. Did you know that? Blake shook his head. During the trial, he'd learned her name, her age, her college. But not her dreams. She volunteered at hospitals. She talked constantly about saving lives. Mrs. Cooper's voice cracked. And then you took her life instead. I know, Blake whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring her back, Amanda's brother said harshly. No, Blake agreed. Nothing can. I would give anything to undo what I did. But I can't. So I'm here to face whatever consequences you need me to face. Mr. Cooper leaned forward. What you did on that plane. Amanda would have done the same thing. She would have helped without hesitation. Blake felt tears streaming down his face. We didn't want to see any good in you, Mrs. Cooper said. We wanted you to be a monster. It was easier that way. But watching you save that man's life, we saw someone who's trying. Someone who's changed. It doesn't change what I took from you, Blake said. No, she agreed. It doesn't. But maybe. Mrs. Cooper took a shaky breath. We've been coming to these hearings for 3 years, holding on to our anger because it was all we had left of Amanda. But it's killing us. The hate, the need for revenge, it's poison. The grandmother spoke for the first time. Amanda wouldn't want this. She believed in forgiveness. In second chances. In redemption. We're dropping the civil suit, Mr. Cooper said. Blake's head snapped up. What? We're not saying what you did was okay. It will never be okay, Mrs. Cooper said firmly. But we see you're trying to be better. And holding on to this anger isn't honoring Amanda's memory. It's destroying ours. Amanda's brother looked away, tears on his face. He wasn't ready to forgive, Blake could see that, but he wasn't objecting either. We have one condition, Mr. Cooper said. Take that technique you used on the plane. Research it. Develop it. Maybe it can save more lives. Do that in Amanda's name. Blake could barely see through his tears. I will. I promise. They didn't hug. They didn't become friends. But something shifted in that room. The weight that had crushed Blake for 3 years didn't disappear, but it became bearable. Shared. Later, Blake met Hannah for coffee. He told her everything. She cried too. Stanley's being released today, she said. He wants to meet you properly. Thank you himself. Blake smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time in years. I'd like that. The miracle hadn't erased his past. But it had opened a door to his future. At 30,000 feet, Blake Hudson had found something he thought he'd lost forever. He'd found hope. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of absolution. Please like and subscribe to help our channel. Morals. Redemption is always possible. Pain can produce purpose. Forgiveness frees the forgiver. Small choices matter enormously. Small choices matter enormously. Everyone carries hidden battles. Self-forgiveness is essential. The greatest moral: it's never too late to become who you wish you'd been all along.